Blog Talk Radio.
Carol the Coach. Sex, love, and relationships. We talk about it here.
Carol the Coach. Compassion with contemporary relevance.
I am a psychotherapist. I can be your personal life coach, and I can help you with your issues. There are no problems too small or too big. You can talk about anything.
Speaker, columnist, radio TV host, and commentator. Carol the Coach brings messages of wellness and empowerment within reach of everyday people every day.
Almost 5 years ago, I lost my soulmate in an accident. He was killed in a plane crash. Life just, for me, has seemed to stop.
There are groups all over the city. I teach one. It is a specific way to start thinking so that you shift how you see the world, which then shifts your energy, and then you feel better and you actually see things differently.
Carol the Coach. Always available, too, at carolthecoach.com.
Now I've got Russell on the line.
I'm 47 years old. I'm a truck driver. I'm married. I have a wife in San Francisco.
Okay.
I haven't been home in 6 months. My thing is, I don't know if I have a sex addiction or what the problem is. Why do I want what I can't have? And as soon as I can have it, I don't want it anymore.
You're right on target when you say, I don't know if I have a sexual addiction. Well, guess what? Yes, you do. And you know what? That's my specialty, Russell, so you're at the right place. Continue.
I meet women online, and I'm in a different part of the country. I travel all 48 states, so I love sex.
I hear self-esteem issues. You never felt good enough, and you didn't feel like you were getting what you should have then, and you're reenacting that now. Do you want to change that about yourself? I got an interesting
email from a woman that I had hoped would call me and we could talk about her issue. So I want to talk to you a little bit. You know, it's scary to talk on the air, and I get that. So her email says, Carol, I listen to your show all the time and really appreciate the guests, the content, and your candid answers, not alone your dedication to this field. When I first discovered my husband's addiction, I read and listened to as much information as I could find. Early on, I repeatedly read that you should stay with the essay and give it at least 2 years. Okay, I'm going to call her Jody. Jody, that is not something you heard me say. The truth of the matter is, being a partner of a sex addict means that you get to decide exactly how long you need to give it. And if you don't feel safe or stable, then you need a therapeutic separation and or a divorce. So I know there are several counselors, therapists, CSATs out there that will say stay 2 years. And I understand their belief is give him time to get healthy, or her, depending on who the sex addict is. But I just want to clarify, you haven't heard me say 2 years because I don't teach that, I don't talk that, and I believe that the partner gets to make that decision. That sometimes is a request from people that do disclosures. You know, disclosures can be so traumatic to hear the entire truth. They will say, and this is the guidelines I've heard many people say, the partner needs to give it at least a year, and the addict needs to give it 2 years because they need to get in solid recovery. But I promise you, that's not me. I want you to do what you need to do. Okay. So Jody said that she has read and heard from almost all sources that a large percentage of couples recovering from this awful situation stay together. As I mentioned several times, I have been researching this addiction and what to do about it. Now, I have said that it's amazing that if I have a couple that just come in because he or she has been unfaithful, oftentimes they'll want to leave the other person. But there's something about sex addiction that I think is compelling to the partner, and the partner says, I get that he or she has an addiction, and I'm willing to see if this person will get healthy. I realized that it wasn't about me. It was about a compulsion, and I'm willing to stick it out for a while. Okay, so I have said that's what I've seen. So Jody says, interestingly, most of the experts that have been guest speakers, writers on this topic, and even my therapist divorced their SA at some point later in their relationship. After noticing this trend, I decided to research divorce rates of couples battling sex addiction. There is plenty of information about divorce rates in the general population, but there was nothing out there stating the divorce rates of SA couples. This leads me to think that the positive statistics toted about couples facing SA and staying married is due to the partner being told to stay for at least 2 years. Do you have any real stats on how long couples really stay together? Thank you for all you do. And no, Jody, I do not. Boy, that would be a fascinating research project. And I promise you that I will take that to AppSats and see if we can't create a survey that would gather information to see how long people stay together. And if they do stay together, or if they decide that it is not worth it. Because here's what I know to be true. You said that your therapist didn't stay with her sex addict husband, and you believe that the only reason the couples may be staying together is because they think they need to. So hopefully on this show, I can say to partners, and you know I have that partner betrayal recovery show on Thursdays at 2 o'clock. I will also say it there. What we want the partner to do is to feel safe. That is our goal. And let's face it, when you get that devastating information, you go into shock. You go into trauma brain. You don't feel safe. And if your hunch is right that people stay together because the readings, the sex addiction information says to do that, well, that would make sense to me, even if I don't. What I know is that, believe it or not, you're in the driver's seat as of the minute you find out what's gone on. And would I like all couples to recover from this? Of course I would. That's me being a therapist wanting marriages to stay together if he's in good recovery, if you know the truth, and if the two of you can compromise and negotiate a lifestyle that makes you feel safe while he continues his recovery and shows you empathy. Because he's got to have those relational skills if the marriage is really going to ever be emotionally gratifying. So that's a long-winded question to your email that you sent me on February 14th. And boy, I appreciate your kind words. I'm wondering where you stand in all this. So, Jody, again, a fake name, keep me posted. Let me know how you're doing. And I know that this kind of thing can be really tough. And when I say you're in the driver's seat, you may laugh at me because you'll go, this is a seat I never wanted to drive in, and I don't feel like I'm in the driver's seat. I feel like I'm reacting to my environment. But truly, I say the partners make decisions based on what they think, their intellect, what they feel, their emotions, and what their intuition tells them, their gut. And we know that when you first find out about betrayal, your brain has probably gone offline because that's a stress response. And I'm forever telling my clients, sex addicts, partners, or just clients that come in with depression and anxiety and parenting problems, I say, Out of those three, don't go with your emotions because emotions usually get you to do things that are not necessarily healthy. So, Jody, I'm going to ask you, what is your gut saying about your marriage? Are you seeing progress? Is it enough to stay? Do you have some of your own boundaries to keep yourself safe? And more than that, I'm going to ask you, do you have some expectations set up that will help you to maintain your own self-respect? Because, you know, so oftentimes the partner carries so much pain and shame about, am I doing the right thing? What am I showing my kids? If my kids don't know, what am I hiding from my kids? I mean, there's a lot of issues you're going through. And if that's the case, get yourself to a partner specialist who's trauma sensitive. That means go to APSATS.org and find somebody that's close to you. Because you'll get much better advice than if you just go to somebody who doesn't understand the nature of this beast. And I call it a beast, but I also got to say, this is the most rewarding work in the world because you're dealing with people that have really hit rock bottom. And most of the time, they're willing to work. And when I see people who've made really bad decisions and they've hurt lots of people, and yet they're ready to work, they're ready to take their life to the next level, wow, then I am impressed with the courageousness, the ability to empathize, and the humility that has to occur to get through this addiction. So that's what I have to say. And I'm wondering, for my listening audience, I know you may be traumatized because you probably went through Valentine's Day. And that's always a tough day, and it even gets worse when something like this has occurred. I mean, it's hard to celebrate. It's hard for the addict to celebrate. It's hard for the partner to celebrate. Now, I got to tell you, if you get into post-traumatic growth, it can feel like a renewal of sorts. But until you're there, whether you're needing to feel safer and be more stabilized or you're grieving big time, what you had, what you thought you had, what you wanted to have, what you don't have, what you wish you had, and what you're fearful you'll never have. The day that celebrates romance and love can be incredibly painful. I work with a lot of men, and I've heard a lot of men doing some very special things to make up for the loss of dependability, the loss of being who you are. You know, that is by far the scariest thing about this disorder. It's not just the acting out. It's that people go, the addict says, who am I? What have I done? How do I get better? And the partner says, oh my gosh, who was I living with? Who is this man or woman that would betray me? So if you had a hard Valentine's Day, I bet you're glad you're over it. And if you had a good Valentine's Day, congratulations. You deserve it. Now, tonight we've got a really interesting show because it is about identity. And what I really love about Rob, this man who has really thought long and hard about identity, is that he believes that identity is directly related to surrendering. And, you know, you think about identity and you think about what do I have to do to prove to myself who I am? And Rob maintains that it's the process of surrendering that really creates identity. And so I can't wait to talk to him about that. It's an interesting concept, and so I want you to have an open mind as you ask him, as you think about what he has to offer. And again, it is an amazing concept to surrender. I know in the 12-step process, surrendering really, the first 3 steps involve surrendering. And when somebody really surrenders to their higher power, they allow their higher power to take the lead. And that allows them to know better what to do. So I'm really interested in this concept of identity. And I thought, we have never talked about that on the show. So I'm going to ask Rob. Hey, Rob, thank you so much for sharing this really important subject of identity. How are you tonight?
I'm doing well. Thanks for asking.
Yeah. Now, you want people to understand that the only way to surrender to one's true self is to surrender to what God wants them to be. And when that surrender occurs, the addict then is, if you will, liberated and can follow his true legacy. So would you explain a little bit about what identity means to you?
Yeah, so, early on in recovery, I had working the 12 steps the first time, I had a guy tell me, we want to say no to this addiction, but we need to say no with a better yes. And I didn't understand what he meant then, but I got kind of tied up in recognizing the better yes is actually a new identity. And what I mean by that is when we come into this program, I felt a certain way about myself. I was a liar. I was a cheater. I was a sex addict. I was all these labels and these identities that was put on me. And when I started becoming free of my addiction and I became clean and was working the program, I didn't know exactly what I was then. Am I still an addict? Am I still a sex addict? Am I still a cheater? I haven't done it in a long time now. Well, who am I now? And I kind of think what he was pointing me to is to finding who I really am at the core without this addiction. What did this addiction rob me from being? And that better yes, the better person, the better me, is wrapped up in finding out who I was supposed to be in the first place before this addiction kind of stole my identity from me and put all these other ones on me.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So what did you discover about yourself? Aside from the addict, who did you figure out that you were?
Yeah, so it took a long trip and a lot of work down the past and currently and the future. And I had to unwrap that. I've heard the analogy of an onion, that you unwrap a layer at a time and you find out more about who you are as you get closer to the middle. So what I had to do is I had to go back in my past and find out where my identity came from. Who assigned it to me. What I found out in my own recovery is my recovery is very, very faith-based now. I found out my identity was given to me from my higher power. It wasn't given to me from parents, from my spouse, from my peers, even from counselors. It was given to me from my higher power. Now, I needed counselors to help me dig out who that identity really is, and I needed to be transparent with my spouse, parents, and others to unwrap who that identity I was given from. But the core of who that identity is comes from my higher power. For me, that's Jesus. He gave me my identity, and what I need to do is kind of wipe away all the other false identities I put on myself and reveal who I really truly am.
And so then explain to me, you really feel like that surrendering process is important to get there. Help me to understand the steps that one might take to understand their own sense of identity.
Okay, so when I was in addiction, and heavy addiction, I thought that the way I reacted to things based on my own knowledge and understanding and reaction, I thought that's what made me unique from other people. And I thought surrendering at that time, to me, surrendering sounded like, well, I'm just going to turn into this, proper, prim and proper, church guy, the nice guy down the street, the guy that never says a bad word, the guy who's ready to help old ladies and the guy that never has a crossword for anybody. I thought surrendering to this magical power somehow took my identity away from me and made me what the church or my wife or everybody else wanted me to be. And that wasn't the truth. That was kind of a lie. The fact of the matter is, if my identity is from my higher power, if he's the one that gives me my unique identity, then every time I surrender to him, I'm actually reclaiming my true identity. So if I surrender to God and do as he asked me to do, I'm actually surrendering to my true identity, and that's what makes me unique. Because God's identity for me is not like anybody else's, and it doesn't have to be, Mr. Rogers or the nice guy down the street. God made warriors too, and I can be that too. What I have to do, though, is surrender to whatever he wishes to make me, not what I think I want to be, and not what other people are trying to be. So surrendering to me is allowing my higher power to define me the way he wants to. And there's a big process to getting to there. It's not as easy as it sounds.
Yeah, I get that. So I know that you believe that one of the ways to begin to understand one's identity is to look at your past. So let's go through some of those steps that, can help somebody really take a deep dive into what their identity is all about.
For the way I went through recovery, the first thing was I had to look back at my past. I had to find out, okay, if I've fallen off this path that God has for me, if I'm not surrendering to him, and I'm putting on these false identities, the author John Eldridge calls them the posers, where did I start to do that? Where did I start putting on these other identities? And for me, it had to do with trauma. I had to look at my past trauma and find out, how that shaped my identity. I created these identities to get through life. They kind of worked for me. They helped me survive, but they weren't my true self. So I had to look at the past. I had to dig through my trauma and find out who defined me in the past, and what traumas defined me, what events defined me, and what things took my identity to a direction other than where God intended it. That was a part of my journey.
Okay, so now knowing that was a part of your journey, what information or message did you get from God about
the message I got was that I didn't grow up in an environment around faith. I didn't grow up in an environment around where, you know, the nice guy next door has much of a chance. I grew up kind of in a violent, you know, kind of a violent upbringing. You know, there was a lot of fighting, and I got, you know, picked on a lot, and I was drinking at an early age, like 14, and it was a culture very ripe for alcohol abuse, sexual abuse, and all of that stuff. To survive, I kind of had to learn how to play the game, so to speak, you know. And I had, there was some neglect, there was abuse, and so I didn't feel like, to survive it, I created the persona that I didn't need anybody. I couldn't rely on anybody, therefore I didn't need anybody. I was told many times, if you want something done, do it yourself. So I never learned how to ask for help. I never really felt like I was abused or anything, because people that had it worse than I had. So I minimized a lot of the things that happened to me, and figured, you know, my mantra was, if it doesn't kill me, it makes me stronger. And the truth of the matter was, I was putting a hard shell around myself, and I was becoming an unfeeling person. I was becoming a person who wasn't in touch with my emotions, and it was really hard for anybody to get in to really know me.
Well, you know, it's interesting you said that you learned how not to depend on anybody and to take care of your needs yourself, because one of the things we look at in couples, sex addicts and partners, we look at each one individually and we say, what is their attachment style? And Rob, you are describing an attachment style called dismissive. And that's really where you couldn't count on anybody early on, and as a result, you learn to take care of yourself. But the problem with that is that it affects your ability to really attach to and relate to other people. And I do believe that's what happened to you.
Yeah, it is. And it also made it where I was unable to ask for my needs. So when my needs weren't met and I would try to meet them myself, I would do them, you know, in ways that weren't appropriate because I wasn't mature enough to do it yet. So it really created an attachment that was dismissive and also avoidant, because I didn't want to get hurt again, so I wouldn't let people in. And it made it very hard for my wife in our marriage.
Well, I can imagine so, and it's almost like I would suspect any wife would say to herself, what is wrong with this marriage? What am I doing that's not getting through to him? Why is he avoiding true emotional intimacy?
Yeah, that's true, and a big part of my recovery is learning how the ways that I avoided intimacy and overcoming those habits, I guess you could call them, that I had, or these ways of dealing with things that would isolate myself and would avoid intimacy.
Yeah, and so at what point did you figure that out?
Well, I went to an intensive with Doug Weiss, and he coined the phrase intimacy anorexia, which basically means that whatever means I use, the name of the game, so to speak, is space. That I keep space between me and other people, and there's many ways I do it, you know, and no matter what happens or what behaviors I have, if I'm creating space between me and my spouse, that's intimacy behavior. It's the anorexic behavior. So I read some books by him, went to intensive, did some counseling with him, and learned the ways that I have avoided people and dismissive and all those traits that I had, withholding love and withholding emotion and just, pretty much anything I could do to keep from actually being truly intimate in a relational sense with my spouse.
So this intensive that you went to with Doug Wise helped you to understand why you were anorexic, intimacy anorexic, and what kinds of things did you have to do to develop that emotional connection?
Well, one of the things is he has a practice called the 3 dailies where I share 2 emotions. My wife shares 2 emotions. I share 2 appreciations for her. She shares 2 with me, and then we pray together. And we did that for a while, and there's also the behaviors are mapped out, and so I monitor myself each day and make sure that I'm not doing any of the things that are, create space. Another way to look at it is I don't do any avoidant behaviors. In other words, I lean into my wife even when there's times that I don't, that every fiber of my body tells me to turn her away and run. I don't. I stay there, I look her in the eye, and I lean in, and I connect with her. So it's connection over avoidance as another way to look at it in a different kind of study that I've done. And that's a little bit more into the emotional focus type stuff that we're working on now together.
Okay, and so I know that you said that in helping people, helping sex addicts specifically, figure out their identity, that you have you've looked at the message that can help them to categorize that. And the first one was past, and you say, do the work to look at where you weaved off that path in the first place. We have to know where we fell off to get a bearing to where we are. And so that was when you realized that you weren't getting your needs met and you were being bullied and you were not in a safe situation, and you decided to take care of your needs by yourself, right?
Yes, that is correct, and that's where I learned the reasons and why I avoided intimacy and the reasons, why I had the dismissive attachment style. All that was dug up through that work into the past.
Got it. And then past traumas that help define our identity make us who we are today until we decide to change that. And so you said, obviously, the book Unwanted was a real helpful book to move you into understanding not only why you developed this style of attachment, but also what you needed to do to change.
Yeah, it did. It started me down the path of doing some real work to change. And that's where, I hate to use the word accountability because we're more into accessibility now. I really want to know, I want to have access into your life, and I'm talking in a peer group now. But there is some accountability there, too, where I share with the guys in a recovery group, how things are going, if I've avoided my wife, if I haven't avoided her, if I've leaned in or not. We kind of need each other to keep us in check on that.
Now, what do you mean we kind of need each other to keep us in check? Because I know...
Yeah,
go ahead.
We don't kind of. We need each other. So
there you go. Okay.
Yeah. I've been in a couple of recovery groups.
Well, I know that you said that we need to heal out trauma and past wounds so it stops identifying us now. And it's like you've got to be able to move beyond that and stop reacting to the woundedness. And then you talk about the present. Can you talk a little bit more about what you believe helps to create that new sense of identity in the present?
Yeah, and that's kind of where the recovery groups that I've been involved with are, and why men need other men in recovery in groups to work with each other, whether it be in meetings, 12-step meetings, or the Men in the Battle that I'm a part of, or other faith-based groups, or whatever it is. You need other men to walk along beside you, because when you dig up where your identity was and where you've fallen off the track, the next step is to not let anybody else identify you now. In other words, don't let your spouse, your counselor, your pastor, your friends, anybody else identify who you are now, because your identity actually comes from your higher power. I mean, in my case. So if I'm identified by my higher power, then I have to have men that can help me recognize that. So when I start acting like, reacting to woundedness from the past, there's guys that can say, "Hey, wait, that's not really you. You're not that person anymore." We need other men to help pull us up, because it's hard to go. It's nice to hear the stories of a guy who's, I prayed about it and I was delivered, and now I'm a new man, and like it happens instantly. It really doesn't work that way. It works over time, consistently doing the things we need to do, and other people recognizing that. And when we're in this betrayal, our spouse isn't always the person that's going to recognize those small changes in identity, because they're dealing with their own trauma. They're dealing with their own betrayal trauma and so forth. So it's hard for them to see that. But when we check in with men in a meeting, in a group, they see us for who we really are. We get to be honest for the first time in those meetings. I know I did. For the first time in my life, I was totally honest about who I was and what I've done. And those men accepted me when I was honest like that. And they said, yeah, a lot of them said, yeah, me too. And so that's where I could be my real self. So I saw where I was, where I got off the track. I was totally honest in the present with who I really am now. And that's when I can start really growing.
Well, that makes sense, and I do believe that there are probably 3 factors that feed into that, and that's why support groups and Bible studies and faith-based groups are so helpful. One is you're in there with other men that have the same feelings. They feel the pain, they feel the shame, and they really, for the first time, don't feel like they are alone on this journey. And I think that really helps to provide the safety to create identity. The second thing I think that happens is that you guys all support each other and hold each other accountable. Like you said, they hold you accountable to looking at yourself and not running from yourself or from the people you love. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I do. I agree with that. And I think you hit a really major topic. We could do a whole show about shame, because one of the biggest identity stealers is shame. And that's one of the places in those safe areas, and it has to be a safe place where a guy can overcome the shame. because shame will steal our identity from us quicker than anything.
And so what would you describe shame as being?
Shame is believing, to me, there's some better definitions, I'm sure, but shame is believing that I'm less than what I really am. Believing that nobody would really love me if they really knew who I really was. I mean, that's how it felt like to me. There's probably better definitions, but that's what it felt like to me.
Right. Well, yes, and certainly when somebody feels shamed, they don't feel deserving. They don't feel like they're a good person. They feel like they're a bad person. And so part of being in a group and living in the present means that for the first time ever, you're going to be authentic. And I know that you quoted Brene Brown in a paper you wrote and said that authenticity is the daily practice of letting go of who we are, who we think we're supposed to be, and embracing who we are. So can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so another author, John Eldridge, that wrote Wild at Heart, says it this way. He says it's posing. You know, it's taking off the masks and not posing for who we think the world needs to see in us, and being who we really truly are. So to be authentic, to me, before recovery, before these groups, I was scared to death of it because I thought if I was authentic, then nobody would love me. Nobody would care for me. You know, they would think I was something less worthy of their time. But then I get in these groups and I'm totally authentic and I'm still accepted. You know, I am who I am. And I have to add in here too, because not every recovery group is faith-based, but what I found in my recovery is a healthy dose of Bible reading and New Testament reading and studying of Paul the Apostle, and realizing that, you know, this guy was killing Christians and God still used him to write most of the New Testament, that if he can be turned around and he can be authentic and real, I can too. So I think that part of it, having men accept me, and then also a good, strong scripture study are both really where I got kind of my base to overcome the shame and be authentic. I knew I wasn't going to become, you know, Paul or an apostle or anything like that. But what I did know was that I'm not too broken, that I can't be fixed. And the other men sitting across from me in these meetings, many of them were as broken as I was, and they had found freedom from their unwanted sexual behavior as well. So I could follow a path that they're doing. So being authentic was a lot easier to do when I got involved with a group that had men that had done some of the same stuff that I had done and had gotten free. I think it would have been tough if it would have been impossible if I'd have stayed in isolation and just did, whether it be Bible study or Bible reading or anything like that. I had to be with men that had been down the road that I'd been and had made it through.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. And, you know, you really have done a lot of research and reading and praying and journaling. And you have really wanted to stay connected because you know that fellowship and that intimacy that you're building in your groups is going to transfer, hopefully, to your family relationships and to the people that you love. I know you quoted Unwanted, and you said, the more you know yourself, the more intimate connection you can have with others. And the more connected you are with others, the more you will discover who you truly are. So it is a cycle that is a win-win for everybody involved, right?
It is, and the way that to unwrap that a little bit, what he says in Unwanted is, we only know our true identity in relation to other people. If I'm isolated, I don't really know who I really am, because as we are as people, we are a community-based organism. I mean, we're supposed to live in community with each other. And if we're not in community, if we're not around other people, we really don't know who we are.
Okay, so you warn people, or at least you warn addicts, hey, be careful who you connect to and who you open your own sense of identity to. So can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I love Brene Brown's quote that hearing our story is a privilege, and those who qualify are the only ones that you must qualify to hear our story. And the way she explains it is, if you're to be open and vulnerable and share with somebody, to qualify, they have to be open and vulnerable to share with you as well. In other words, you have to have some skin in the game. So we have to be in community with each other to know, very much what it said in Unwanted, to know who I truly am. I have to be connected with other people. That those other people must also be people that qualify to hear my story. So they've got to be as open and vulnerable with me. I kind of look at the way I look at things. If I'm connected with somebody and they try to point my identity to anything other than, a son of God, if they try to point my identity in any way other than that, they probably don't qualify to hear my story. And that might sound a little harsh, but, I am a son of God. I am loved by him. And if somebody tries to define me in any other way, then they're trying to take my identity somewhere it's not supposed to be. So being open and vulnerable to somebody, I'm expecting them to do the same with me.
Right. And, it is so very true that if that's not reciprocal, you can't really have an intimate relationship. And then your vulnerability is wasted on that person because they can't respond to you in the same way, right?
Yeah, and the other part of that, too, is it takes the judgment away. If I'm open and vulnerable to somebody, I'm not going to be judging them. And vice versa, the same with them. If they're open and vulnerable with me and sharing, their whole heart with me, they're not going to put me in a place of judgment. And it overcomes that. And that's one of the things that fuels the shame with guys is, and especially with this addiction, that society is somewhat judgmental about it. It was the 70s, I think, when Patrick Carnes wrote the book Out of the Shadows, and believe it or not, this one's still in the shadows because there's just so much judgment around it. But it's really not much different than any other addiction. I've tried a few on. Trust me, they're the same.
Right. No, I get that. Absolutely. So then one of your questions you ask people to think about, because, again, you said the creation of identity really depends on surrendering to God or a higher power. So why do you believe it's important to let God define us as opposed to us defining ourselves?
Well, because my beliefs is that, and I get these beliefs from studying the Scripture and listen to my pastor and listen to other men of faith. My belief is that God created me for a specific person. He didn't just want somebody like Rob. I'm going to create this guy like Rob, and I want him to be, so tall and have this personality. No, he's got a purpose for me on this earth. There's a reason I'm here. And he created me for that one specific person, and that's where my identity is. That's where my uniqueness is. And so for me, that's the third leg of the identity thing, is the future, is what is my purpose? Once I've dug through my past and I'm no longer reacting to it, and now I'm not letting anybody else define me now except God above, and now I got to find out what is that identity, what is that purpose he's designed me for, and the rest is, and just serve that purpose. And that's where the surrendering comes into. When we finally get through that to where we're looking into the future, it's like God designed me for a purpose. I mean, he put me here for a reason. And I think I kind of know what that is now. Now I can surrender to that instead of trying to make this world the way I want it. I can let it be what God wants it to be. So that takes a deeper walk of faith, and I encourage men to find good men of faith to help them with that journey. You need to read and stuff like that, but that's not found in a book. That's found in prayer, meditation, good relationship with other men of Christ.
That makes a lot of sense. And so as we begin to wind up for tonight, I'm wondering, how would you define future? We're looking at identity, and what would you tell men that are willing to go through this 4-step process, if you will? What would you tell them about future?
It's based on faith. And when you find, some guys say you find your calling or you surrender to what God wants you to do. What's hard about that is a lot of times we don't know where it's going to go. It looks like a path that goes into who knows what. We're letting go of control. We're surrendering control up to God, not ourselves, so we don't know where it's going to end up. So that's where we have to dig a deeper faith. We have to trust that whatever that God's put me on earth to do, it's going to be good. It'll be good for me. I'll be okay. I'll serve him well, and he'll take me to a place that ultimately will be a better place than I've been. So the future is all about faith. And my favorite quote from the Bible is, we walk by faith, not by sight, from 2 Corinthians. And, that's kind of how every day I start. I have to walk by faith and not by sight, because sometimes through this addiction and this recovery process and this, searching for identity, which is not an easy topic we can really discuss in an hour, so I feel like I was talking all over the place. But sometimes that's really hard to do, is to have faith that that's going to be okay.
Well, no. I think you've made this very, very clear, and I so appreciate you sharing your time, because I'm telling you, I believe that the men and women that I work with want to know themselves better. They want more intimacy. They want more authenticity, and they're not exactly sure how to do that. So you gave them some good direction tonight. And, Rob, I just really appreciate all the work you put forth in our community.
Well, thank you. I appreciate all the help you've given me to this point. So, and all the men of the community, because I was made by the men I was around, and I was made by God above, but I was able to surrender to him thanks to the men around me. And there's a lot of guys that have helped me on my path to find my way, and I really appreciate and owe it all to those guys.
Oh, yeah, I appreciate that. You've worked hard, and I get what you're saying. You're saying again, it's one of those principles that you outlined, and that is really pay attention to the people that you're hanging with and make sure that they're working with you to support you on this journey and not against you. So I just appreciate you. I appreciate your work, and thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
All right, make it a good one. That was Rob, and as you can tell, he has really worked hard on creating identity. And he wanted to pass that along because he knows how difficult that can be to understand and know yourself. So that's it for me for tonight. And, hey, thank you for hanging out and being with me. You know I love it. And, you know, this is tough work, but it's also incredibly rewarding. You men and women work harder than anybody I know. So, as I say at the end of every show, there'll only be one of you at all times. Fearlessly have the courage to be yourself. And if you're wanting to do something nice for your wife, you might send her to Italy to hang out with me in July. Go to sexhelpwithcarolthecoach.com and look at the trip that we're going to offer to help our partners feel better about themselves and know their own post-traumatic growth. And I'll see you next week. Hey, listeners, are you ready for a little healing and restoration after betrayal? Hi, I'm Carol the Coach, and we're leaving for Tuscany, Italy on July 25th through August 1st, and I would love for you to join us. There is no denying that I want you to find your post-traumatic growth, and one of the ways you can do that is by settling in and experiencing life on a different level. We're going to be staying in a beautiful traditional Italian farmhouse with 7 bedrooms located between Florence and Siena. The farmhouse has a pool on a 625-acre winery. The tour is your opportunity to regain your life and treat yourself to adventure, nurturing, and personal growth. And I will be providing morning workshops and a free coaching session just for you. So if you're ready to reclaim your life and live the life you deserve, go to Sex Help with Carol the Coach or Street View Adventure Travel and sign up. There are only 8 spots left, so treat yourself to an international experience of connection, reflection, laughter, and support with other women. And just know I can't wait to meet you. So arrivederci, and we'll see you next week for more Sex Help with Carol the Coach. Make it a good week.